Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about DevSecOps, more importantly, SecDevOps, and how we can use that to help organizations shift left their security practices. My name is Mark Lambert. I'm the VP of Products at Parasoft, and I'm joined by Wilhelm Harker, who is one of our senior solutions architects. And he's going to be doing the difficult part of today. He's going to be showing you the technology in action and kind of giving you some tips as to how you can position security at the beginning of your software development process. Before we jump into the details, a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to access the materials today after today's webinar. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A box in the meeting controls. Go ahead and click there and ask questions as we go. We'll be kind of co-reviewing the questions as we go and answering ones, but also leaving some for the end of today's session as well. If you run into any difficulties during the session, please comment in the chat, and our administrative team will be able to address any technical issues that we're running into. Okay, so with that being said, let's get going. So what we're focusing on today is talking about security, and specifically this term DevSecOps, and how we can help organizations put security into their software development process to really address problems before your clients find them or before they become part of public news. Security is the #1 concern in most organizations. A lot of that is driven from regulation, such as PCI, GDPR, SOX, and HIPAA. And there's more regulation coming. The states of California and New Jersey have enacted processes around consumer privacy as well. So we know that there is a problem, and we know that there is a lot of regulation associated around privacy and obviously credit cards with the payment credit card industry. However, what we know is that breaches are still happening. Many organizations are live in constant fear of becoming the next headline news, the next Equifax, the next Target. There are constant breaches being reported in the industry. So obviously, whatever we're doing today isn't working. Our current approach to security has some fundamental flaws with it. And what we're going to do today is talk about what that approach is, the challenges, and how we can help organizations address that. So if we look at what the traditional or kind of the state of the current state of security testing, I kind of look at how that is. Typically, it's a dev, then sec, then ops approach. Typically, you have development teams working on various components of an overall system. If you have an agile team, you may have testers embedded within the development team. Typically, an application, before it goes to release, goes through some level of integration testing or QA. In a traditional kind of waterfall-centric world, you might have a dedicated QA team, which are validating functional user stories. And then right before it goes to deployment, we run our non-functional testing. So ensuring that our application meets our performance requirements, but also ensuring that it doesn't have any security vulnerabilities. Typically, organizations are focused this way because of a lack of available resources. Security is a topic that many people don't think of when they're developing, just because it's you're more highly focused on functional implementation and getting the capability done as quickly as possible. Most development teams are incentivized to finish functionality rather than necessarily finish it in a secure manner. So because security is not typically ingrained into the process, but also that typically teams don't have the knowledge within their teams to help with diagnosing or understanding security issues, security is left to the end of the process. So you end up with specialized skills, a smaller team of security experts that are used as the gate before something goes into production, often using specialized tools which don't apply to the development teams or the test teams' daily workflows. So what happens more often than not is that the security team will identify some vulnerability just before deployment or as part of the deployment checklist and say, okay, hold on guys, we have to stop. We have to verify that these security issues are resolved. And they're very valid security issues. However, the teams will typically push back on this process, and they push back on this process for several reasons. They maybe write up a time up against a time crunch, so a particular delivery date that they're needing to hit, and they're too close to release. As I mentioned before, many times the tools that are being used by our security experts are specialized in that security area, the results of which are very difficult for the development team to kind of translate into a real problem within their code base. And it might even be a part of the code base that they're no longer working on. Now, so what ends up happening is the development team will triage, and they'll come to kind of some negotiation as to things which must be done and things that should be done. And then the integration team now are faced with the daunting task of not knowing what they need to recertify before they go to release. In essence, they're having to do the whole thing again. So what the result of this is actually two things. It's not only do you end up with some delays in your release because of these later stage security issues, but also you don't get all the security issues remediated. You will go to release with known security defects with some promise to fix those problems in the future. So what we're talking about today is a different approach. Rather than dev, then sec, then ops, let's put security at the beginning of the process. Sure, we'd love to have a security expert embedded in each of our teams, but we know that that knowledge is typically contained with just a few small set of individuals. So rather than spreading that team thinly across the organization, let's use them as the experts that they are and use them as advisors to the development team and define a secure coding or a secure development policy up front, defining a set of standards or practices that the teams can apply as part of their ongoing process, which then gives you the ability to not just put security into the code from the beginning, but also gives us a framework where we can start to validate that security policy as part of my integration and QA process. Now, of course, we are going to still find some security vulnerabilities before deployment. But rather than using these as a kind of the last point in the process, use those again to actually improve the process. So use those security vulnerabilities along with root cause analysis that we can leverage as part of our QA and integration process, and use those to actually improve the software development process from the start. So improve the policy the development team are leveraging. So this approach of sec and then dev and then ops really ensures that we have a scalable practice that can minimize the number of late cycle security vulnerabilities. Our ultimate goal is to reduce that to close to zero, so that you don't have, as I said before, a set of security vulnerabilities that are out in production and that will get fixed at some point in the future, but more importantly, they're embedded into the process from the beginning, so you're implementing preventative strategies. But to make that successful, you have to be doing this in a way that the development team can easily consume both the results, but also embed the tooling into their development process. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to orientate our conversation today around three primary challenges that we see as organizations try to implement a DevSecOps strategy. I'm not going to try rebranding DevSecOps as SecDevOps today. DevSecOps is typically the term that most organizations face, or use, should I say, but the three challenges that you typically face when you're trying to implement this process improvement. First, as I said at the beginning, the security knowledge is typically limited to a small subset of individuals within the organization. Our security experts, they're a highly valuable resource. And we want to somehow those resources into advisors so that the rest of the team can leverage that expertise in a way that they can easily consume, and a way that uses tooling that is familiar to their daily activity. Now, by doing that, by bringing it into our process, we're going to help start to address these end of cycle security testing vulnerabilities. And we're going to try and identify the security vulnerabilities as part of our regular process so that we can get a visibility into the state of our security risk as part of continuous development activities. Rather than getting your security assessment at the end of the process and then kind of being in essence, a firefighting mode, baking it into the process so I can take a proactive approach and a planned approach to bringing my application into compliance with whatever security guidelines our organization has defined. So with that all being said, I'm going to hand over to Wilhelm here.
For this diagram, to cover the workflow, we have a number of different components here that represent different parts of the SecDevOps workflow. Down here at the bottom, we have architect or lead. So this would be the security expert Mark was talking about that's in limited supply, the person that would be defining our test configuration. So this would be the security policy that you want the organization to follow, which maps to the security standard that you're most interested in, whether that's OWASP, CWE, etc. So to show this first step of the process, Mark will get into the rest of the workflow as we go through the webinar. But this first step of the process is really to show you how easily our security expert could come in and define a policy that can be shared across the team. So we're looking at Parasoft's reporting and analytics dashboard here, but we'll come back to that. I want to take you to where a security expert would go to define that test configuration. And you'll notice that while we're talking about .NET today, Parasoft also supports Java, C, C++, and a number of other languages through integration with open source analyzers as well. So as a security expert, I'm interested in CWE top 25 here. And the first thing I would do looking at this is just show which rules are enabled. I'd probably sort by severity to look at the most important ones first. And ultimately, as I'm reviewing this, what's nice is there's documentation associated with every rule, which goes into descriptions, it goes into the security relevance, as well as example code, example repairs, and of course, references here at the bottom for where these rules came from. Now, nice thing about the rules is many of them are also parameterizable. So if there's certain tweaks you need to make to the rule to fit the code base, that's doable as well. And what I would normally do here is pick the rule set that most closely aligns with what I'm trying to enforce across the team, duplicate it, make the changes I need. You'll notice here we have a drop down of different categories you can filter by. And you might notice here there's categories that are beyond just security. And that is because Parasoft's approach to security is to implement it as a quality process that the developers are following. So many of our customers will also enable other rules that fall into, finding bugs and many other different categories, garbage collection, etc. So from here, once I've got this rule set defined, this is shareable or it's shared rather for the development team to then take in and use. Last thing I'll point out here that's pretty neat is we also can make these printable docs available. So if you have a wiki or something that you want to post it into, it's easy to do that as well. But really, that's as easy as it looks. Is you just define the rules that you want based on the rule set you have, and it's shared across the team so developers can start taking advantage of that. So that's the first step of the process. Mark, are you there?
Yes, I am. Okay, so thank you, Wilhelm. So yeah, as you just showed, it's very easy to identify the standard and create the test configuration built upon that standard. So Parasoft has complete coverage for the OWASP top 10 as well as CWE top 25. We go beyond CWE top 25 and cover the CWE CUSP rules as well, which are an additional 16 guidelines from CWE. And we should also point out that the Parasoft tools are all certified by MITRE, the organization behind CWE, as CWE compatible. Now, Wilhelm did just show us the documentation and the examples that are for fix and repair within the documentation, but there's also embedded training videos within there as well. So links not just to the OWASP website, but also links to education videos that can help the team become more aware and educated around security best practices, but also what some of the security issues are within the code base. So explaining things like SQL injection, tainted data, and what have you. Wilhelm also mentioned that the 3 core Parasoft products support both Java, C++, and .NET languages. And in addition to that, we also support a number of other open source analyzers that give a broader security view, covering languages like Android and Swift, for example, for mobile development. So now we've got our set of best practices defined. As Wilhelm said, maybe bringing in quality into the process as well. We next want to start enabling the team so we can start applying those best practices earlier in the process. So if we return back to our architectural diagram, so we have our test configuration now, and then we have a number of developers within our ecosystem. The test configuration that Wilhelm created within our reporting and analytics platform is now available to the developers to leverage directly within their IDE. We support Eclipse, IntelliJ, NetBeans, as well as Visual Studio. And this gives you the ability to execute the code before, or execute the analysis of the code before you check it into source control. Now, we promote a model where you do exactly that. You say, okay, let me analyze the code before I check it into source control. But what we don't promote or advocate is a model where you gate the developer from checking it into source control. Instead, what we want to do is to gate your CI pipeline or your deployment process. This is where integration with your CI infrastructure like Jenkins, Bamboo, TeamCity, is really, really important. And the ability to be able to execute the analysis as part of your Maven build or your Makefile infrastructure, and being able to perform a deeper analysis of the entire code base, and then gate the promotion of your development artifacts through the process. Now, we'll talk about how we can provide feedback from this. But let's go ahead and look at the specifics of how this works and how we can execute within the IDE, and we'll talk about the CI integration as well. So Wilhelm, over to you.
All right, great. So let's take a look at Visual Studio here. I'd run some analysis earlier, but let's actually show that in action. So I've been working on a number of files here. I made some changes to these classes. And over here, I'm going to run a configuration for OWASP top 10. So this is performing a deep analysis, and the idea is I really want to do this execution before I check in the code, right? I take pride in the work that I do. I want to make sure that it's clean before I check it in. While this is running, I'll also point out that we have the test configurations from DTP available here in the IDE. So those test configurations we're looking at on the browser, as a developer, I can come in, I can choose which one I want to run, I can set favorites, all of that. The other nice thing that we make available here is a continuous mode of execution that we call it a continuous quality assistant. And what this basically does is, as I'm coding, when I save a file, that's going to trigger a lightweight analysis where it's designed to quickly run and give me quick feedback as I'm running the code. So now that we've seen that execution take place, let's actually look at some of the output from this. So coming here to this one, injection of data received from environment variables. One thing to point out is that that documentation we were looking at earlier is also available for the developer. So this is very important so that as a training tool, right, we want to transfer that security knowledge that's really only a few individuals will have in the organization to the masses, right? So all the developers can sort of benefit from this knowledge. So they can read up on the documentation, see what they need to do. We also provide findings details here for our flow analysis results. So if we take a look at this, this is walking us through the simulated execution path that our engine took to come to the determination that we have this injection problem. So if we take a look, it even tells us the violation cause and violation point. So if we look in the editor itself, it also tells us that. So here on line 207, we're getting an environment variable. So this is that tainting point. And we don't have any validation methods or anything to protect for what might be coming into our application from this. And then further down in line 213, we see this is where that tainted data is being used, and at no point in between was validation of that data done. And as a result, we have this violation now reported. So what I would normally do as a developer here is go, oh, this is definitely something I should fix, go make the fix. But the last thing I want to show you here is our ability to suppress violations. So oftentimes when there's rules you agree with, you're going to occasionally run into cases where you want to have an exception to the rule. You still like the rule, you still want to run the rule, but in this particular case, it makes more sense to ignore that violation or suppress it rather. And there are a number of different options available to the developer. We recommend in the source code where the suppressions are embedded as comments. This is great because wherever the source code goes, the suppression goes with it. But for some organizations that have policies preventing them from adding comments to the code like that, like legacy code, for example, these suppressions can also be stored on DTP where they'll be shared across the team that way. So when I either fix the violation or suppress it, as a developer, the main point is that policy that was defined by our security expert was shared to the team. Me as a developer, I can proactively run that analysis and be proactive in cleaning my code before I check it in. And along the way, I'm becoming a better developer because as I'm working through these violations, looking at the documentation, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm not making the same mistakes I was before. So that's the part here for when we're looking at the IDE. Mark?
Yep. Yeah.
Back to
Sorry.
you.
Could you just go back? You could just go back one slide. Yes. Thank you. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, so Wilhelm just kind of showed us the IDE workflow, how the developer can very quickly execute analysis in the IDE. But as I mentioned, we don't want to gate the checking in of code based upon the developer's IDE-based workflow. What you want to do is you want to implement a trust but verify approach to DevSecOps. And actually, this was the advice out of the SANS Institute State of DevOps paper that they published earlier this year. In essence, enabling your development team to move forward. If you gate them to check in, you're going to have slower adoption of the practices. You're going to get a lot of resistance within the organization, and you are going to get a lot of visibility of reduced cadence due to security issues. Instead, leverage the CI infrastructure and leverage it effectively to perform not only a kind of safety net on the process, but having complete analysis across the entire code base. We focus on enabling the developers to execute analysis on the code that they're working on the code that they understand. And then your CI process is able to take that code, apply or integrate it with the rest of the code base, and apply a more comprehensive analysis of the entire code base to understand the interrelationships between the different elements of the code. Now, this gives us the ability, as I said, to gate the CI pipeline, but also send results into our reporting and analytics dashboard for kind of monitoring of the process and providing auditing. So let's summarize where we got to. So we talked about the end of cycle security testing. We showed you a couple of things here. We showed you how you can execute directly within the IDE. Wilhelm showed you how we can do both deep analysis of the code, and he was able to trigger that kind of on demand and say, okay, I've got these files, I've done enough work, I want to do the deep analysis. But we also have this lightweight analysis that can run in the background continuously as I'm saving the file. So I go ahead and save the file, and we'll run a lightweight set of analysis against the code that's there. And then we talked about the CI pipeline. Now, what I said is that CI pipeline is going to provide us data that we can feed into our process. And let's now talk about how we can take that data and give us ongoing visibility as we're developing our application. So let's return to the diagram. And we've got our CI integration there. We've got data. We've got the same set of test configuration, or the same test configuration that we're using on the desktop. And then the output of that, the results of that, can actually go into our reporting and analytics dashboard. The reporting and analytics dashboard is going to give me a couple of things. It's going to give me the ability to be able to bring the security data into an overall view on my quality process. So we can integrate security results along with other quality code analysis, but also bringing in coverage from unit testing, functional test automation, taking unit testing results from things like JUnit, Google Test, or C++ testing framework, and combining that with functional test data from something like Parasoft SOA test. And this is where the Parasoft products go beyond just security to focus on broader quality initiative and how we can embed the security testing into the standard software development process. When we are looking at the security dashboards, you'll see a view as to where we sit with compliance against a particular standard, and we're able to generate PDF compliance reports that are then archivable and used for offline auditing of your deployment infrastructure. Now, this also gives us a great opportunity to feed back to the developers information about maybe analysis that they hadn't done locally on the desktop, potentially due to the looking at the entire scope of the code base, or providing that safety net, that trust but verify. we are able to get data on the development process and the activities within the source control system, like Git, Subversion, Mercurial, and we're able to cross-correlate the violations with the individuals that are responsible for that part of the code. That cross-correlation gives authorship assignment, and then that assignment can be used to propagate the results to the specific developer's IDE. So kind of round-tripping the process. So Wilhelm, why don't we go ahead and look at some of that data inside of the dashboard?
All right, great. So as Mark was explaining, there's actually a number of roles here that I'm going to walk you through, starting with the manager, then lead, and sort of coming full circle back to the individual developer. So here is in our dashboard, you'll see there's a number of different ones kind of out of the box. We're looking at CWE Top 25, so I'll go there. And so as a manager, I want to take this wealth of data, this continuous quality data that's coming from my development process, and use that to identify risk, make my go, no-go decisions, and really kind of analyze this to make the right business decision. So we'll notice here, we've got a number of widgets. These are all very customizable based on what data you want to see. If we drill down into one of them, this is our interactive CWE compliance report. So you'll notice for the CWE Top 25, all the weaknesses are listed here, and as well as whether or not we are compliant with that particular weakness with the standard. Not only that, it'll tell us the number of violations we have for that particular weakness, which we'll drill down to in a second. As Mark mentioned, you can also download a PDF version of this compliance report. The fact that we are CWE compatible, when we take a look at the PDF report, everything that we have in that interactive view from the web page is available here. So if you have to worry about audits or provide details associated with your compliance status to a particular standard, this makes it really easy to share and get the information to the right auditors and the right people that are interested. So as a manager, I have that real-time data available to me to start making decisions. Now, transitioning more to a lead's perspective, a lead might come in and go, okay, well, my manager told me that we need to start addressing some of these issues. And so when we drill down into this, now we're looking at the Violations Explorer. And what this does is this gives us that context, right? We can look at the violations, we can see the source code associated with it. As you should expect, the documentation is also there. And what's really powerful is also the violation history. So what often happens with security violations in that standard DevSecOps workflow Mark was describing earlier, you find a security issue, and oftentimes because it's so late in the process, it doesn't get addressed, or it falls through the cracks. With this, you can actually see when it was identified for the first time, how long you've known about it. You can see which branch this violation manifests in. So it really gives you a good sense of these violations, how long they've been there, what you want to do about them. This prioritization view is especially powerful as well. Mark mentioned that we automatically identify authorship of violations based on who's checking in that particular line of code last. And this authorship, along with a lead could come in here, reassign things, reprioritize things. But this prioritization view ultimately leads back to the developer. So not only can the developer proactively run analysis prior to checking in, they can also benefit from that CI run that happens maybe when they're not in the office. So when they come in the morning and they update their sources, they can also import the results from their CI into their IDE. I've made changes to this, local changes to this file. That's why that we're seeing that message. But ultimately, bringing this around full circle, not only can I proactively run this analysis as a developer, I'm getting that feedback from the CI as well, so I can address any violations that I may have missed prior to checking in, or maybe violations that were a result of someone else as well. So these are sort of the three phases or three roles that we have when we start looking at our reporting and analytics, and how that affects the overall workflow, and how the team can use this technology to really embed security into their process and be proactive about it.
Thanks, Wilhelm. Actually, could you go back to the dashboard for a second? There's a couple of things I'd like to highlight.
Sure.
If you go to the compliance, go to the compliance dashboard, and then rather than the CWE, look at the .NET one for OWASP, the one that's right above your CWE one right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a couple of things to note about the dashboards. Wilhelm kind of went through a very just quick kind of jumping into the compliance report to kind of show you how quick it is to get an overview of where you stand with compliance against your standard. But also, if you notice here, kind of on the right-hand side in the middle, there's a widget called the OWASP Violations by Risk. What we've done within the compliance dashboards within the PowerSoft ecosystem is we've taken the risk mechanisms for the different standards and given you a visual representation on that. So here you can see the risk scoring matrix, or that OWASP applies to their different OWASP top 10 guidelines, and you can see the number of violations that are outstanding against each of those. If you go ahead, Wilhelm, and click on the SEI CERT compliance dashboard, two above yours, there you go. So CERT is another standard, very focused around C and C++, or should I say it's very focused around engineering best practices. Here we've got a dashboard that's focused around C and one for C++. And again, likewise, we're leveraging the same risk scoring framework that the CERT organization have put, and we're leveraging that within the dashboard here. So you can see we have a bullseye in the top right, which shows me each of the three levels and commenting on the priority scoring. And then if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's a heat map on the right-hand side as well, which shows me the number of violations for a particular CERT rule or recommendation, and then it's colored associated to which of the CERT levels it is. So we take the risk scoring frameworks that the different standards provide you, and we built into the system the ability to do compliance reporting based upon those standards, but also give you an overview so you can monitor your process and improve your workflow. The one other thing as well is, Wilhelm, do you have that PDF still available for the compliance report? I think it's your last tab. Yeah. Inside of the PDF report, if you scroll down to the first page there, yeah, so you've got an overview on the, just scroll up just a little bit, an overview of compliance as it relates to each of the CWEs. Then the next part is actually showing you how you're achieving compliance. So being able to say, yeah, I've got a particular CWE, what rules, what checkers from a PowerSoft perspective am I actually using to enforce that? And then if you scroll down further, you should see the deviation report. In this particular case, we have no deviations, but this is in essence documenting a suppression, because as Wilhelm said, it's not every violation is a case where somebody's going to go ahead and resolve the violation. Some of the violations are going to be inspection-based rules, saying that somebody needs to be review a particular implementation within the code base to ensure that it does indeed meet the compliance requirements. This is where you would document that process. So thank you, Wilhelm. If we can go ahead and step back to the slides.
Sure.
Okay, so we talked about getting the results into the IDE, at the end there. So the point here is that by integrating into the CI process, we can get ongoing feedback onto our current state of compliance with the security standards. It enables us to optimize our development workflow. It enables us to get the results into the developer's IDE along with all of the documentation and educational materials that we were talking about earlier. You're able to get that information as if you'd run it locally within desktop, but then you can get real-time compliance reporting. So at any point in time, you can generate the PDS for compliance reporting to provide continuous updates, but also use that as part of your remediation plan to ensure that you're getting towards your compliance goals. The workflow, just kind of reiterate that, as we said, we start with the architect, the lead, the security expert, the person that's going to be defining the set of best practices that the team should follow. This is where we can take a set of security guidelines, but also add additional quality practices to the process. They're then shared to the developers where they can do execution directly within the IDE before you check it into source control. And then once it's checked into source control, the CI process picks it up. We integrate into the build scripts through command line interface, but also we have plugins for the CI platforms that will take the results of the security analysis and use that to gate the CI/CD pipeline. And then kind of round tripping it, we send that results to the dashboard as we were just showing, and then bringing the results or the quality tasks directly into the developer's IDE. Again, providing us both a safety net, but also providing the ability to do a full code analysis of the entire code base and kind of giving greater visibility as to what's going on from a security compliance perspective. Okay, so we're kind of towards the end, but a couple of points that we want to make. I see we have a few questions, so if folks do have questions, go ahead and ask those. I'll kind of be picking those off as we go. Okay, so the three key takeaways. And this first one is actually going to address one of the questions. So one of the questions we had is this an on-premise solution, or does this require my code to be sent to the cloud? No, this is a on-premise solution, or should I say yes, it is an on-premise solution. So the analysis is actually being executed on the developer's desktop or on the machine that's doing the CI build process. The code never leaves your infrastructure, and you're able to therefore, obviously distribute the execution model, but also, as we've shown, you can configure it for your specific needs. Not only just turning rules on and off, but also rules can be parameterized to take into account specific design patterns within your code base. We also talked about security being embedded into the development process from the start. And the key thing here is that we're trying to do security in a way that is easily consumable by the development team. I'm not necessarily saying that the security team stop using whatever specialized tools that they're using today. Obviously, the importance of that is a little bit mitigated from the development team's perspective. But the point here is to enable the development team to be able to apply the security best practices and then leverage security specialized tools to find the vulnerabilities and improve the process. It's kind of that feedback loop. And then the last thing we talked about was real-time compliance reporting, how we can give you immediate visibility into the state of security rather than waiting just before you release it to operations, because we all know that projects never run on time. So you're always running up against the last kind of week or two before release, and you really don't want to wait for bad news. At that point, it's much better to get the input earlier in the process. Okay, so a couple of bits of reading material for you guys to look at. We do have a blog that kind of mirrors this presentation today. That's available on our website. Also, we've done quite a bit of work with the CERT organization. So we have a blog around that, but also a really great YouTube video where Arthur Hicken, our security evangelist, is actually doing a webinar with the CERT team, and he'll actually talk about in that short video some of the things we talked about today, but more oriented around around CERT. And then lastly, secure by design and GDPR. GDPR is very important to our European clients. However, we are also seeing different variations of GDPR kind of affecting our US client base. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to look at we had a couple of questions which I think would be useful to answer before we wrap up, and we have a couple of minutes. The first question was about custom rules, and the question specifically is, can I create my own security rules? The short answer to that question is yes. So Parasoft have custom rule creation capability within our tooling for all of the languages. Obviously, these rules are not necessarily just security oriented. You can create your own quality driven rules, or maybe it's to enforce a corporate standard or best practice around the use of certain APIs. So as I said, that's available for all of the core languages that we support. Another one here around Jira integration. Can I create Jira tickets based upon security violations? Yes. However, there's a word of caution here. What you don't want to do is automatically create a whole bunch of Jira tickets from your CI automation, because you could very easily find that you could end up with thousands of Jira tickets, and all of a sudden your infrastructure is heavily polluted because somebody checked in some bad code. Instead, what we recommend is that you actually do the automated creation of tickets in a system like a Jira or a version 1, for example, as part of your triaging process. So Wilhelm showed us the prioritization view. That is actually configurable to enable connection directly to your system of record. So again, Jira version 1 would be 2 examples. And as part of that review process, where you're looking at the violations in the web browser, there's actually a button that's configurable within that view where I can simply click the button and create a ticket in Jira, for example. That's a much better workflow because what you're going to find is, as you're trying to deploy a DevSecOps or a SecDevOps process, you will find that you'll have a large amount of static analysis violations that you have to triage and prioritize. But as you're going through that, you will uncover things that are real defects in your product that need to be fixed. When you found something that's a defect and your process requires an auditing process around that, that integration gives you immediate abilities to kind of just click and go, so to speak. Okay, I think this is from the same person that was asking the custom rules question. So can you customize the compliance reports? So the compliance reports, we showed the weakness enumeration plan. So the thing that says a particular CWE is validated by a particular Parasoft checker. The short answer to this question is yes, you can customize the compliance pack. You may find that some of the rules, or some of the checkers, should I say, that we map to specific CWE guidelines may not apply for your organization. You might say that rule is not appropriate for me, so you would want to remove it from the compliance pack. You might also identify a different rule that you want to include in it, or create your own custom rule. That mapping can be fully configurable through the use of an administration UI within the product. So you can define what the mappings are between a particular guideline and a particular checker within the Parasoft ecosystem. I think we actually touched upon everything else. These are the questions were asked kind of as we were going through. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank everybody for your time today. If you would like to try the Parasoft solution, you can go to our website. And on the website, there's an area towards the bottom where you can just click Try Parasoft link, and you'll have access to the technology. We'll be able to connect you with one of our experts who will be able to guide you through the process. And as I said before, please feel free to check out these blogs and what have you. Wilhelm, thank you very much for partaking today and helping me through the difficult bit. And everybody else, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.